Simple Suburban Murder. Tom and Scott Mystery. Book 1. Author Mark Richard Zubro. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Ost. For Kathy. Chapter 5. Mrs. Evans rushed out of the room and down the stairs. I took the disc as I followed her out. I caught up with her on the landing overlooking the family room. We saw Scott sprawled on the floor, and Keith draped over the back of a chair, both laughing uncontrollably. The two riotous ones below noticed their audience at the same moment. They pointed at each other and yelled simultaneously, "He did it!" Their laughter redoubled. I watched my lover laughing and pounding the floor like a little kid. It was impossible to keep a straight face. We joined the laughter. The two of them stopped only when they began to choke. His mother descended the stairs and went to Keith. He waved her help away and slowly composed himself. I looked around the room to find the debris from the crash. Nothing seemed broken or out of place. "What happened, Keith?" Mrs. Evans said with a confused and, of course, worried smile. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine." He pointed at Scott. "Mr. Carpenter is funny. He can stand on his head and belch the alphabet." We all looked at Scott, who now sat up in the middle of the floor grinning and holding his sides. This was the man who pitched no-hitters in Games 5 and 7 of the World Series 2 years ago. That seventh game was the highest-rated show in TV history. Scott explained, "I got through the alphabet twice. Keith insisted I show him how. I was glad to. I helped him lean against the wall with his legs up and all balanced. I was halfway through the alphabet again when Keith lost his balance. He fell into me. I fell into the bureau. He pointed out a piece of furniture now resting against the far wall. The crash you heard was when it banged into the wall. I hope we didn't break anything." He picked himself up. Mrs. Evans checked the bureau. "It's fine." She turned back to them. "You're not hurt?" she asked. "No," they both replied. She looked relieved. "We're almost done with our talk," I said. "Is it safe to leave you two alone down here?" They nodded, holding in grins that threatened to break out in renewed laughter. "Why don't you show Mr. Carpenter one of your nice games?" Mrs. Evans suggested. "You could play quietly until we're finished." "Okay," they said. We went upstairs. Occasional laughter drifted from below. "I hope your friend is all right," she said. "He's pretty tough. I hope he didn't damage anything." "No, and anyway, the bureau is old. I am glad that Keith seems to like Mr. Carpenter." "Yes, he does." Her doubts about my taking the disc didn't resurface. I didn't remind her. I switched back to Mr. Evans. "About your husband." The worried smile found its accustomed place. "Do you have any idea where he went the night of the murder?" "No." I should have expected that by now. "What time did he leave the house?" "Around 9. "He didn't say anything?" "No, he never did." "Everybody else was home?" "Oh, yes. I put the girls to bed right after he left. I looked in each of the boys' rooms at 10 o'clock. They were watching TV. Phil said he was out all night." "I don't know why he would say such a thing. If he was out, he left after 10, and I didn't know about it. I couldn't control what he did these past few years," she ended lamely. There was nothing I could say to that. There was nothing more to learn from her. In the car, I gave Scott a long look. "You never told me you could belch the alphabet." "While standing on my head," he reminded me. "Yeah, that too. I don't tell you everything. There are still some mysteries about me." He started the car. "Do I want to know where you learned how to do it?" "Sure. In the minor leagues. We used to do all kinds of stupid stuff like that. There was never anything to do in the one-horse towns we played in. We didn't have any money to do it with, if there was. So in cheap motels we entertained ourselves. One guy, Slimy Doubloon," I interrupted. "Slimy Doubloon." "He claimed that was his real name," Scott insisted. "Okay," I said. Slimy was special. He could fart Dixie after he ate a 16-inch pepperoni, sausage, and anchovy pizza. He ate the whole thing himself. Had to, or he couldn't get beyond the first verse. Oh. Anyway, he was gross and 75 pounds overweight, but all muscle. If he ever hit the ball, it went miles. Unfortunately, he spent most of his summer spinning wind. He couldn't learn to hit even a minor league curve. He paused. Is there more? Sure. Slimy taught a bunch of us how to belch the alphabet while standing on your heads. Right. He gave me his dazzling smile. You could have worked up a whole routine to entertain during the 7th inning stretch. We did. We were set to do it for a July 4th game. Slimy'd already eaten the pizza for his part of the act. The management got wind of it the inning before and threatened to fire us all if we went on with it. Showbiz lost a great act. Want me to teach you? Thanks. I'll pass. He drove for a minute in silence and asked, Okay, Sherlock, what did you learn? The Evanses' marital relationship was straight out of the Middle Ages. I explained about the finances. If she knows anything about the murder, it's buried so deep I don't think anyone could dig it out. She's hopeless? I think so. I did find one thing. I held up the floppy disk and explained. If whoever broke in took only the disks, then there must be something important on them. They missed this one, and it might be vital. Do you think you can break into it? I doubt it, but I'll try some combinations. An access code like that could be anything. If he hid his true financial status on the disk, he probably made breaking it into it supremely complicated. Oh. Or he could have made it as simple as using his name spelled backwards. I'll work at it, but I don't hold out much hope for it. What did Keith say when you gave him the envelope? He let me read the note. Phil talked about seeing him soon and to take it easy, that kind of stuff. Nothing helpful. He also included $1,000. That's a hell of a scale he must be working at. I'd like to be in his union. As we walked in the door at my place, I heard the phone ringing. I hurried to snatch it up. Oh, good, you're finally there, Meg said as she heard my voice. What's wrong? I got a visit from Armstrong around 5 today. At first he tried to be all slick and friendly. What he really wanted to know was what you and I talked about earlier today. Sylvester must have reported seeing us talking. I assumed so. I told him that as far as I knew, my job description did not include revealing the contents of private conversations. After I said that, he switched to threats about fraternizing with faculty while working. I told him that as a librarian, it was part of my job description to meet with teachers. After that, he muttered threats about job security. I'm sorry to bring this pressure on you, Meg, she laughed. Don't be absurd. That son of a bitch can't touch me. I work because I enjoy it. I could have retired ages ago. I'm not worried. I called because he also made threats about you. What'd he say? He said he knew you were pursuing the investigation, contrary to his direct orders, that you were in big trouble, and that if I was part of helping you, I would be in as much trouble. I'm afraid I didn't help the situation any by bursting into laughter when he said that. I smiled at the picture of Meg laughing in Armstrong's face. You know how he splutters when he's angry, Meg continued. I've heard, but I've never seen. He started doing that, spraying several shelves of nearby books. He listed more threats at the same time, and amid all those, he let it slip that he will call you in for a meeting tomorrow. I thought I'd better warn you. Thanks, I'll be ready. I started to apologize again, but she cut me off. Nonsense, I enjoy this. You're doing the right thing, Tom. I thanked her again after I hung up. I told Scott what Meg said. Can he do anything to you? Scott sounded worried. He's the boss, not God. That's what administrators tend to forget. He's got no control over what I think, ever, nor over what I say and do outside of my classroom. None. Tomorrow, he'll probably try to bully me into doing what he wants. That sounds like such bullshit to me, Scott said. I shrugged. What puzzles me is that so many administrators are former teachers. I've known some as teachers. They were relatively normal people. Giving them an administrative certificate turns them into arrogant, insensitive bullies. It's happened to everyone that I know. Is that why you never became an administrator? Partly, but the main reason I never wanted to be an administrator was kids. He gave me a quizzical look. I explained. As far as I'm concerned, there's no point in being in the education field if you aren't dealing directly with the kids in the classroom. The vast majority of administrators have two main functions: push paper and punish kids. I can't see doing that with my life. The higher salary isn't worth the headaches. We wandered into the kitchen to put together some dinner. "What's in the fridge?" I asked, as I looked through the cupboards. Scott peered into the freezer compartment. He poked into it randomly. Bits of frost cascaded to the floor. "You haven't defrosted yet this year," he commented. "I defrost the freezer once a year. Someday I'm going to get one of the frost-free kind. That and the self-cleaning oven are probably the greatest inventions of the 20th century." He closed the freezer door. "Nothing there?" I asked. "Nothing visible," was his cryptic reply. He began rearranging items on the shelves. "There's a jar of olives here that look edible," he sounded doubtful, "and some chicken that's been dead too long. He doesn't criticize my food-keeping habits. He's just as bad. His advantage is he has the frost-free fridge and a self-cleaning oven." I closed the last cupboard door. "Nothing up here?" "I suggest we eat out," Scott said. Fortunately, there was no other choice. "Are we going to see Greg's sister tonight?" he asked as we got in the car. "Yeah, it's after we eat. She lives in Joliet. We can eat at Bruns in New Lenox. It's on the way." As we drove, I said, "What I don't get about Armstrong and Sylvester and all this is why they are so anxious to keep me from talking to people and asking questions. I don't buy that crap they gave me the day of the murder. I assume they have something to hide. I don't know what yet, but I intend to find out." Greg's sister lived 2 blocks south of downtown Joliet. Even in the dark, the neighborhood looked old and run down. Her apartment was one half of the 3rd floor of what was once someone's sprawling upper-middle-class home. Domestic squallings leaked from behind sullen doors as we ascended the stairs. Brooding teenagers gathered in the pools of darkness of the stairwells. When she answered our ring, she held a sleeping baby on her shoulder. She said, "Can I help you?" I introduced myself and Scott. "I remember your name from school, Mr. Mason. Come on in." She closed the door. "I didn't catch your friend's name?" I repeated Scott's name. No reaction. She wasn't a fan. She had straight black hair and a pleasant face. She wore a faded gray dress and house slippers. I never had Sheila in class, so I didn't know what she was like. We entered what was now a living room. The walls were bare. The only furniture was a couch and a lamp. Dust rose from the sofa as we sat on it. "Let me put the baby down." She disappeared through the doorway. She came back minutes later, carrying a beige folding chair. She set it up and sat down. "This isn't about Greg, is it?" she asked. "He's not in any trouble, if that's what you mean," I answered. She looked relieved. "It is about him, in a way, though." Carefully, I explained the situation to her, starting with my discovering Evan's body last week. She listened without reacting. I concluded, "I hope you can give us some information that might lead to the killer." She smiled slightly and said softly, "Phil should have never told, and Greg should have kept his mouth shut." Greg didn't have a lot of choice. Yes, he did. He should have denied it. "It's none of your business." Her smile disappeared. Her voice remained low and flat as she went on. "I expect you want me to say this man traumatized me and lured me into evil beyond mention. Sorry, I can't help you there. I'd heard about his reputation for one of my girlfriends." "Don't bother to ask who. I'm not like Greg. I won't be pressured into telling. After my girlfriend told me, I got interested. The boys who hung around us girls were so immature. I wanted to know what a real man felt like. I was far more willing than he was at seducing. If not for yourself, think of the others who weren't willing. It must have been awful for them," I said. "They aren't my problem. I knew what I wanted, went after it, got it. And unlike my brother, I don't betray confidences. I tried numerous other questions, but she refused to answer, finally retreating into stubborn silence. Scott, seeing my growing frustration, forestalled my anger outburst by asking, "Won't you at least tell us what kind of person you think Evans was?" She sneered at him. I waited until my temper had eased enough for me to ask, "Do you know anything about a computer disk Evans had and why anyone would want to steal it?" "No," she snapped. Finally, a response. I tried a few more questions, but the stony silence returned. I tried a last threat. "If we tell the police what we know, they'll have questions to ask you." She called my bluff. "Tell them I couldn't care less." She stood up. "If that's all, gentlemen." "But you could help us find a killer," I said. "I don't care. It's not my problem. To me, Evans is just some guy who's dead." There really was little else to say or do. We left. "That was a bomb," I said as we started home. "Yeah, but you've got another one to add to your list of people who knew him, but didn't hate him." Scott paused and added, "How could she be that uncaring and unemotional about the death of someone she made love to? I know it was a couple of years ago, but still something's not right there." I agreed. I'm not sure what it is. She was almost catatonic about the whole situation. "I wonder how she pays the bills," Scott asked. "Me too," I said, and added, "That was a bizarre experience." Scott nodded. "Yeah, she was weird. Are you going to tell the police?" "I don't know." The next day at school started deceptively normal. The morning passed without a summons to the office. I had about decided what he'd said to Meg was an idle threat. When Georgette appeared at my classroom door, she beckoned me over. "Mr. Sylvester wants you in his office," she whispered nervously. "Someone has to stay with this class," I replied. "I'm to stay with them." She looked petrified. "They're only kids," I assured her. "That's what I'm afraid of," she said. Sylvester was in the outer office. "You wanted to see me," I said. He spoke stiffly. "Mr. Armstrong will speak to you in my office." I went in. Sylvester closed the door behind me. He stayed outside. Armstrong moved from behind Sylvester's desk. All of his fat friendliness from our first meeting was gone. Neither of us sat down. "Well, Mr. Mason, you seem to have forgotten the directive we gave you in this office last week." Armstrong began to pace as he talked. "I thought you understood from our little chat that you weren't to speak to students and faculty about the incident, and you have." He stopped and stared at me, seeming to expect an answer. I stared back. When I remained silent, he resumed pacing. "You've questioned Mr. Vance several times. He's one of our finest teachers, head of one of our most successful departments, a prize-winning department. He's a loyal faculty member, not to be harassed by the likes of you." I wondered if Vance told voluntarily or under pressure. "Furthermore, you've spoken to current as well as former students, making all kinds of wild accusations about a man who can no longer defend himself." I guessed that Sheila had called school and told about our visit. I wondered why. She didn't seem to fear any official involvement. "How dare you talk to children who are incapable of dealing with such an issue? And I imagine you expected your little investigation to go unnoticed." "It hasn't. I've been trying to get Detective Robertson on the phone. I'm sure he'll have a number of things to say to you about playing detective." He stopped in front of me, waving a finger in my face. "But worse for you, you crossed me, buddy, and you're going to pay." He settled his bulk behind Sylvester's desk and stabbed a fat finger in my direction. "It would be far better for you if you turned in your resignation right now. In fact, if you resign in the next 5 minutes, I'll guarantee you a positive letter of recommendation from the district." I sat down. "On precisely what in state law, school code, teacher contract, board policy, job description, or anything else do you choose to base this threat?" "It's more than a threat, and I don't need any of those things. You disobeyed a direct order. That's insubordination. I don't need anything else but that." "I have no intention of resigning," I replied. If you wish to state your threat in front of my union representative and then follow proper dismissal procedures, go right ahead. I'd be delighted to have a formal hearing about all this." He got pop-eyed with anger. He began to splutter. Sylvester's desktop received a heavy downpour. "Don't think I'm bluffing," he rasped. "I don't care if you are," I said. He started to say something, but I stopped him. "What I would like to know is what you and Mr. Sylvester are trying to hide in all this." "We have nothing to hide," he snarled. "I suspect you do, although I freely admit I can't prove it. You've tried to keep a lid on me from the beginning, and I wonder why. I told you we wanted to avoid scandalizing the public. And I don't buy that crap. You don't work this hard at covering up if there isn't something to hide. This meeting confirms that. I think the police would find this very interesting." "You bet they will," he said, "when they hear what you've done." I shrugged unconcernedly. He got a mean piggy-like look on his face. Suddenly, his tone shifted. He tried to mix menace with cruelty. "Well then, listen to this. If the police aren't enough to stop you, then maybe this will." He harumphed loudly, then said, "If you don't resign now, I'll spread it all over this district that you're a faggot." I raised an eyebrow at him quizzically. "Don't think I won't. I know exactly which religious fundamentalist parents to call. It won't be me trying to get rid of you. It'll be community pressure that you won't be able to stop. Whatever you're hiding must be awful big for you to make threats that you think are enormous." "I'm not bluffing," he said. "Why did Sheila Davis call you?" I asked. "I don't know any such person," he said quickly. "What is it you've done, Mr. Armstrong? Molest children? How dare you suggest such a thing? Murder Evans yourself?" He was inarticulate with spluttering. The desk might float away if the deluge kept up. "Rob the school district blind," I added. Flinging himself out of the chair, he leaped halfway across the desk at me. "Get out!" he roared. I remained seated. He looked like a beach whale. I enjoy it when administrators lose control. Still leaning across the desk, he shook his fist at me. "I said get out!" he bellowed. "Sit down, Mr. Armstrong," I said. He lowered his arm. His eyes blinked as if astonished to see me still there. He must be used to people cowering before his bullshit. "Don't sit if you don't want," I said calmly. "You've made a mistake somewhere along the line. I don't know what it is. I doubt if you killed Evans. I suspect you made some slip-up, and Evans caught you at it. Maybe he was a threat to you in some way, which would be typical of the man. You hoped with his death the threat would end. However, when they find the killer, or in the midst of the investigation, you're afraid it'll all come out. It would be best to tell the police yourself, or if you want, tell me. I could try to help." He stood with his fist scrunched into the saliva on top of the desk, staring at me. While I spoke, he hadn't moved. He wasn't threatening or yelling now. "Get out," he whispered. I stood up. "I feel sorry for you," I said, outside my classroom. Outside my classroom, Georgette stood as far out in the hallway as she could, while still keeping an eye on the room. I glanced inside. The kids talked quietly. "Did they behave?" I asked. She took a handkerchief out of her sleeve and mopped sweat off her brow. "Yes, thank God. Some of them wanted to go to the bathroom," she added fiercely, "but I didn't let them." "That's the spirit," I said. "We'll make a teacher out of you yet." "Not me," she said, and left. I resumed teaching. To me, it was beyond obvious that Sylvester and Armstrong were up to their armpits in deep shit. Somehow connected to Evans Armstrong's threats. I chose to ignore. He couldn't fire me for the bullshit reason he gave. As for trumpeting my gayness around, I'd long ago vowed I would never live in fear because of my sexual orientation. I doubted if he'd try that option. It would take too long to organize a campaign. If he did anything, I suspected it would be to tattle to the cops. Perhaps my calm reaction had blunted his bluster. If he was going to try something, there was no point in worrying about it. When Scott picked me up that night, I told him what happened. I finished. My guess is Sheila made it with Armstrong. That's the only reason I can think of for her to call. "You're sure it was her?" Who else could it be? You're right, he said. Are you worried about Armstrong's threat? He asked. I don't think he can do anything to really harm me. He looked at me as he waited for the lane to clear so he could pull into the driveway. I sure hope not, he said. I pointed toward the house. We have visitors. He followed my gaze to the police car sitting next to the house at the end of the 50-foot drive. The two cops who met us were very pleasant. They told us Detective Robinson wanted to talk to us. We weren't under arrest, but would we accompany them to the police station? They didn't know about what or wouldn't say. They were polite, but firm. They said they would follow us in their car. This visit to the police station was far more subdued than the last. There was only one person at the desk, a sergeant pecking at a typewriter. She ignored us. One of the cops who'd been at the house led us down to a barren little room. It contained a table, but no chairs. There were no outside windows, but along one wall was a mirror a fourth grader could guess had a viewing room behind it. Scott's first action was to wave through the mirror at whoever may have been watching. The cop told us to wait. We were left alone for over 2 hours. Neither of us said much. We waited in growing irritation. We'd had no dinner. Finally, Scott said, "Maybe they intended to starve us into submission." At that moment, Robertson and Murphy walked in. Frank had a sour look on his face. Robertson was beet red and ready to explode. Robertson started. "You two fucked me over the other night. When I came over, I got suckered in by Mr. Baseball Hero. Jesus, what an asshole. Then he brings autographed baseballs for my boys. If it wouldn't break their hearts, I'd throw them away when I got home. I may, anyway." Unwisely, I asked what happened. "You want to know? Let me tell you." His voice grew louder as he gathered steam. "You've talked to all kinds of innocent people and upset them no end. You tried to conduct official police business. You concealed knowledge from the police in a homicide investigation. You obstructed justice. You fucked up. Just about everything. I'll probably have you both arrested." He dropped his voice to a whisper. "Besides which, you lied to me." "That we never did," I said. He yelled, "You find a kid that half the police in the state are looking for, and you let him get away. Not telling us is as good as a lie in my book." He slammed his fist on the table. "I hate liars. If we'd brought police, we'd never have got to him." "That wasn't your decision to make," Robertson snapped. "You must have found out from Mrs. Evans," Scott said. "No, it was the younger boy. He told us, or we still wouldn't know what you two were up to." "Keith told," Scott said. "Oh, don't worry." Now he was loud and sarcastic. "He didn't turn you in. He'd slipped out when we went over there around 3 today for some regular checking. After the slip, we got the story out of both of them. By 4, we were looking for you." "Oh," I said. "They must have just missed us at school." "Yeah. Oh, what if the other kid had gotten himself hurt or killed after you let him go? What if he killed his old man? What are you guys... God, one overpriced ball player and a nosy school teacher. Shit." His temper spent. He sat on the edge of the table with his back to us. From near the door, Frank said, "You should have told us, Tom." His voice was calm but reproving. We looked at him. Silence seeped into the room. "Do you want all we know?" Scott asked. I wished he hadn't. "What for?" Robertson snapped. Silence descended, stretched. Finally, I asked, "What's going on here?" "We arrested the murderer this afternoon," Frank said. "You've kept us like this, and you already had the killer?" Now I was angry. Robertson threw a snarl in our direction. "We wanted to finish up all the paperwork so we could bring a completed case to our amateur detective friends." "Who did it?" Scott asked. "Who killed Evans?" Robertson sounded insufferably smug and sarcastic. "We shouldn't have to tell you amateur geniuses," Frank said. "Leonard Vance, the head of the department. He told me some negative things about Evans, but it never struck me that he hated him. I said he may not have said anything to you, but he said enough to us. We have witnesses who say the department, jealously, was incredibly fierce. It finally came to a head. We've talked to numerous school personnel who confirmed that they hated each other." "That's not what he told me," I muttered. Robertson heard. That's why you should leave these things to the police. We know how to ask questions and get answers. Who told you they hated each other? I asked. You're off the case, Robertson growled. At least tell me. Did he confess? No. He didn't need to. He has no alibi for the time of death. Frank said, It's safe to tell you that he was seen with Evans around midnight that night. He didn't deny that when we confronted him with it. He was the last to see him alive. We traced Evans's movements at midnight. He was in the Denny's restaurant in Orland Park with Vance. The waitress remembered them because of their loud arguing. How'd you trace them? I asked. Robertson said, solid police legwork, following up leads and tips, not running around like know-it-alls and over their heads. I wouldn't have to practice to intensely dislike John Robertson. You're lucky, Frank said. If Phil had been involved in the death, both of you would have been in big trouble. As it is, the kid's simply a runaway. You're off the hook. Their explanation didn't seem sufficient to me, but obviously no one wanted my opinion or intended to give a full account. Are we free to go? I asked. Frank said, Only if you promise not to interfere in police business now or ever. I don't want their promises, Robertson said. I want them scared. He turned to us. Frank talked me out of arresting you guys. I almost did anyway, but I've got to work with the guy. If I ever see your faces around here again, I'm arresting you. I don't care if you're here to pay a traffic ticket. He slammed the door as he walked out. Sorry, Frank, I said. Don't worry about it. You got in over your heads. Just let us do the police business from now on. We went to eat at the Taco Bell on 159th Street. I know it's untrendy and probably even heretical, but I think their Mexican food is the best in the world. We talked as we ate. I was pissed. Arresting Vance doesn't make sense to me, I said. Why not? You were suspicious of him. Yes, because he was the only one until Sheila who didn't hate Evans. It turns out he did, just like everybody else. Except Sheila. You know what really fries me? Scott pointed to the mess I had made eating a hard-shell taco. That over 30 years you still can't eat a taco without breaking the shell. I gave him a dirty look. I said, It pisses me off that Robinson made us wait over 2 hours. That was a pisser, he agreed. I took a bite and chewed for a while. They've got the wrong man, I stated. He put down his burrito and gave me a steely-eyed look. He said, Look, Tom, it turns out the guy had a motive. Plus, he was seen with the victim. The police caught him. It's done. I didn't want to give in. Yeah, I guess, I muttered. We ate in silence for a minute. I can't believe I fell for his lies. It happens. Forget it. I wonder which school personnel gave them the insight about departmental infighting. I'd lay bets it was Sylvester or Armstrong. You're prejudiced, and I wonder if the police found out about the gambling operation. If he didn't confess, maybe not. But someone in the department might have let it slip, I mused. Not if they were all in on it. If Vance killed him, why isn't the gambling part of the solution? I said. I don't know. Scott sounded slightly frustrated. We aren't in it anymore. We're out of it. It's solved. I've got my doubts. Come on, Tom. Forget it. We almost got in a lot of trouble. Let's drop it like the cops said. All right, I gave in reluctantly. When I pulled into the driveway at my place, I said, It's supposed to snow. Tonight, I want to put the car in the garage. There's barely room for one person to walk around the car in the old farmhouse garage, so I let Scott out first. He walked into the house while I pulled the car into the garage. I shut off the motor and the lights took the keys and got out. I stretched in the narrow space. I was tired. I closed the garage door as I walked into the yard. Someone grabbed me violently from behind. A gloved hand clamped over my mouth, kept me from calling out. My reactions weren't quick or strong enough to break the iron hard grip. Mason, a voice whispered. I nodded my head half an inch. Keep your nose out of the Evans murder, and forget about Phil Evans, or next time you'll get hurt worse than this. Shattering pain thundered from the side of my head. Then nothing. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.